Welcome to this explainer. If you've ever found yourself wondering how luxury empires are actually built and, how quickly pure family greed can tear them apart, well, we're going to unpack exactly how a tiny Florence hat shop transformed into a massive $22.6 billion global empire. And the path there, it is paved with a totally shocking, dark tale of betrayal and ultimately murder. Because beneath all that immense glamour of the high fashion world, the story of Gucci is absolutely packed with intense family feuds, hostile corporate takeovers, and honestly just unbelievable hubris. There's this old, frankly brilliant Italian saying about family businesses. It goes, the first generation builds, the second expands, and the third destroys. Now, this isn't just some clever phrase we're throwing around. It is literally the exact three-act blueprint of the tragedy we're about to explore today. It perfectly outlines the chaos that happened right behind the polished, exclusive doors of this iconic fashion house. So let's dive right in. Act 1. The Builder. Gucci's incredible vision actually began in total poverty. It's crazy to think about, but after his parents' straw hat shop went bankrupt, an 18-year-old Guccio moved to London and managed to find work at the famous Savoy Hotel. And it was there, just watching the rich and famous check in day after day, that he learned a vital lesson. He realized that luxury luggage, it was way more than just functional. It was a high society status symbol that definitively separated the haves from the have-nots. So after getting some hands-on experience in leatherworking right after World War I, he finally saved up enough cash to open his own humble leather shop back in Florence. This was in 1921, when he was 40 years old. But as you probably know, scaling a business is rarely glamorous in the beginning, and Guccio definitely did not explode into a mega brand overnight. Far from it. He actually struggled heavily with debt after overexpanding his workshop to try and meet the demand for his unique designs. At one point, he literally had to rely on his son-in-law for a financial bailout just to keep the lights on. As he got older, Guccio was counting on his three ambitious sons, Aldo, Rodolfo, and Vasco, to eventually take the reins. But here's the catch. While Guccio was perfectly content just running his single local leather shop, his sons, they had completely different, incredibly aggressive plans to change everything.
Which brings us to Act 2, the Expanders.
This second generation aggressively pushed their somewhat reluctant father to grow the brand. They basically talked a hesitant Guccio into opening a shop in Rome. And that move, it ended up being a massive success during World War II, mostly because soldiers were buying up gifts for their wives and girlfriends. From there, by the 1950s, they had generated enough profit to open a store in Milan. But the real crowning achievement was flying out to New York City in 1953 to open their very first American store. Sadly, though, the pressure of all this might have just been too much for the patriarch. Guccio Gucci died of a heart attack a mere 2 weeks after that New York store opened its doors. When you look at the business contrast here, it is just staggering. Now, Guccio left the company to his 3 sons, keeping his daughter entirely out of the will, which, as you might guess, sparked the very first of many bitter legal dramas for the family. But purely from a commercial standpoint, the second generation took a single local leather shop and turned it into a full-blown Hollywood status symbol. Being the first luxury Italian brand in New York made them an overnight sensation. They didn't stop there either. They expanded all the way to Hong Kong, capitalizing incredibly early on the Asian market, and even started launching their own fragrance lines. Now, I want you to notice the exact 50-50 split highlighted right here in 1974. After the third brother, Vasco, passed away, Aldo and Rodolfo consolidated their power by buying out his widow. This move left the incredibly lucrative, massively expanding global company split perfectly 50-50 between the 2 remaining brothers. On paper, sure, it looks neat, fair, and totally balanced. But in reality, this precise, rigid split laid the exact groundwork for absolute chaos. And that brings us to Act 3, the Destroyers. Keep that proverb in mind. The third generation destroys, because the true seeds of that destruction were entirely planted in how this inheritance was handled. Aldo made the choice to give his sons, Giorgio, Roberto, and Paolo, these tiny, relatively powerless fractions of his half of the company. But meanwhile, Rodolfo held incredibly tightly to his full 50%. His plan was to eventually pass it entirely intact to his one and only son, Maurizio. You can imagine the tension, right? This massive imbalance created constant, intense feuding among the cousins over who was actually going to lead Gucci into the future. Things escalated drastically around 1972. Enter Maurizio's new wife, Patricia Reggiani. Now, Rodolfo absolutely despised her. He openly called her a social climber. And to give you an idea of who she was, her personal motto was literally, "It's better to cry in a Rolls Royce than to be happy in a bicycle." Patricia deeply loved the lavish lifestyle, and behind the scenes, she aggressively pushed Maurizio to take over as the CEO of Gucci. She was constantly playing family members against one another, throwing fuel on the already intense family drama. If you ever wanted a masterclass in how to start a corporate civil war, well, this is it. When Rodolfo died, his strict warnings about Patrizia were totally ignored, and his full 50% transferred directly to Maurizio. So overnight, Maurizio went from owning nothing to owning half the empire. This triggered a totally chaotic civil war. The cousins, sitting there with their tiny fragmented shares, were absolutely furious. And to make matters worse, everyone had totally different conflicting visions for what the future of the Gucci brand should actually look like. $100 million. That is the massive chunk of revenue Maurizio deliberately burned the second he took charge. See, at the time, Gucci was licensing its brand out to department stores. They were making huge money, sure, but it was cheapening the name, and knockoffs were absolutely everywhere. Maurizio wanted Gucci to be exclusively for the rich and famous again, so he aggressively pulled back all that licensing. Instantly losing $100 million seemed like a catastrophic, terrible idea at the time, but today, a lot of experts argue it actually saved the legacy of the brand in the long run. Meanwhile, remember Maurizio's cousin, Paolo? He was absolutely furious over his tiny ownership stake and the fact that his family kept rejecting his design ideas. So he sought absolute revenge. Get this, he literally ratted out his own 81-year-old father, Aldo, for tax evasion and successfully sent him to prison for over a year. Paolo then burned through $8 million fighting Gucci in court just so he could launch a rival Paolo Gucci brand. It was a massive flop, to say the least. Gucci bought up the rights, made the products disappear, and Paolo ended up going totally bankrupt by 1993, sitting on $90 million in debt. Back over at the main company, Maurizio brought in an investment firm called InvestCorp to essentially buy out his feuding family members. He also brought in a brilliant executive named Don Mello. Together, to save the brand's exclusivity, they made some truly ruthless cuts. They slashed the number of global stores from 1,000 down to just 180. They also completely gutted the product line, reducing the number of items sold from 22,000 down to just 7,000. They wanted to focus entirely on bringing back high-end classics like the bamboo bag and Gucci loafers. But, and this is a crucial takeaway about business hubris, Maurizio's ego just went way too far. Against all business logic, he decided to kill Gucci's highly profitable accessories line, insisting the brand should only be accessible to the ultra-wealthy. Even worse, he actually decided to get rid of the classic GG logo. That logo alone accounted for 70% of their sales. Because of this massive hubris, the company began bleeding $30 million every single year. It got so bad they couldn't even afford to pay their own suppliers. Act 4. Murder in the House and the Resurgence. By 1993, with bankruptcy looming, InvestCorp had enough. They forced Maurizio out entirely, buying his 50% stake for $150 million. So for the first time in history, there wasn't a single Gucci family member working at the House of Gucci. But the drama was far from over. In fact, it turned incredibly violent. In 1994, Maurizio's divorce from Patrizia was officially finalized. Patrizia was deeply angry and utterly terrified that if he remarried, it would cut off her lavish lifestyle. So, she actually began asking around town how to get rid of him. In 1995, Maurizio was shot 3 times in the head in broad daylight. The case actually went cold for 2 whole years, until an anonymous tip finally revealed that Patrizia had hired a hitman. 29 years. That was the prison sentence Patrizia received for orchestrating the assassination of her ex-husband. And in a detail that honestly just perfectly captures her entire character, she point-blank refused an early work release program. She literally told the authorities she had never worked a day in her life and she definitely wasn't about to start now. Now, with the family drama, the endless infighting, and the tragic violence completely removed from the board, the brand itself was primed for a massive corporate resurgence. It is absolutely fascinating to see how rapidly the company recovered the second the family was out of the picture. The new creative director, Tom Ford, along with CEO Domenico De Sole, a duo famously dubbed the Tom Dom era, swooped in and immediately brought back that classic GG logo that Maurizio had so foolishly killed. They aggressively targeted a younger, edgier generation. Just look at the numbers. In just one single year, from 1995 to 1996, sales almost doubled, jumping from $263 million to $500 million. It was a complete turnaround.
But as we know, the high fashion world is always cutthroat, even without the Gucci family pulling the strings. Investcorp took the company public with a massively successful IPO, cashing out with a cool $2 billion profit. Then the giant fashion conglomerate LVMH attempted a so-called friendly takeover when Gucci's stock dipped. To defend themselves against this hostile move, Gucci executives quickly raised outside capital, started buying up rival luxury brands, and eventually formed the massive conglomerate we know today as the Kering Group.
Which brings us to today. The brand is arguably stronger than it has ever been. They boast over 500 stores globally, tens of millions of followers online, and they successfully brought back their accessories line to hit that absolute sweet spot between accessibility and luxury. Today, the Gucci brand sits at an astounding estimated value of $22.6 billion. That's a long way from a small leather shop in Florence, right? Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to wrap up our explainer. The Gucci family completely lost control of their own name, yet the brand itself evolved into a $22 billion global empire. Considering the proverb we started with, that the third generation destroys, was the complete tragic destruction of the family itself the only possible way the House of Gucci could actually survive? Think about it. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.